Hey there, it's Robert Ohado, astrologer and intuitive. So we are in a Mercury retrograde right now in Aries, and today, April 11th, as I do this social live, it is the midpoint of this Mercury retrograde in Aries. And let me just tell you something. I haven't seen and experienced, which I'll be telling you about in a minute here, a retrograde like this in a long time. So I want you to ask yourself some questions to get you oriented. Now, the retrograde itself began on April 1st. Nice April Fool's Day, right? And here we are 11 days into it at the midpoint, but this is an exceptionally long Mercury retrograde. It goes until April 25th, which is basically 23, 24 days for Mercury retrograde. That's not usual. Usually it's like 20, 21, maybe 22 days. So it's like, Hermes has got something to say to us and the gods have something to say to us. So what do they have then to say to you, to me, to us? Well, I want you to sense if you've been feeling like you have lost some core sense of your purpose or your coordinates of purpose. I want you to look around, and it's probably already in your face, the energy of your relationships. And just note, which, like, once again, is probably right in the room, what relationships just seem to have turned on a dime, or the energy of those relationships just seem to completely change. And you're left kind of going, well, what the F? What is going on here? If you find that you're in some deep emotional confusion or crossroads in your relationships, I'm going to tell you exactly why. Also, if you find yourself just simply at a life's crossroads in many areas of your life, this is all connected to what this Mercury retrograde in Aries is about. And if you just really feel like I have felt, one setback after another smacking you down, or having accidents, that would be me. If that's been going on in your life and it just feels like you think you've got a plan, you think you've got a goal, you think you're going to go this way, and next thing you know, it's blocked. You have a bike accident, you have something happen to you that just really leaves you in a big question mark. Like, what do I do with this? What is this? If everything happens for a reason, what is the reason for this? Especially during this Mercury retrograde, this is what we want to look at. Now, also, if you just have a general sense that you're struggling with a lot of the whys in your life, why did this happen? Why is this going on? And why not this? Why not the goal or plan that I had set down? Well, I have totally got you covered. There is a common core, absolute theme to everything I just presented to you in terms of questions. And even if I didn't get a question that maybe is generating in yourself right now or in your life through circumstances, synchronicities, and events, still you're going to want to hang out, because there is essential life wisdom coming up next in this very special video. I am super glad to be back. I was out for 3 months because of multiple things, but most notably a bike accident. I'll tell you a little bit more about that when the time is right. But welcome to this Mercury retrograde in Aries, technically right now live event, and we're going to be looking at facing why you were really born. Okay, so getting into it here, I want you to frame up with me. You got to track with me. We're going to go through lots of dates and unique moments in this retrograde. The midpoint right now is a very unique moment in the retrograde. I'm going to be teaching you about the 3 actual phases of all Mercury retrogrades, but where we are at in this Mercury retrograde. I had really wanted to do this video like weeks ago, and life happened. So I'll tell you about that in framing up what the phases are, the dates of the phases, because really all these themes that are coming up in your life and all that I'm going to go through, and the core pieces and the core thing really that connects them all, they're going to be very active for quite some time. There are 3 phases in a Mercury retrograde. There's the setup phase, the Mercury retrograde itself, and then there's an integration phase. So oftentimes we think of Mercury retrogrades as lasting 3.5 weeks maybe, but really it's more like 2 months-ish, if not a little bit more, 2 months and some change, because there's the setup phase, then the retrograde, and then the integration phase, and all of that adds up to more than just 3.5 weeks. So I'm going to give you the exact dates of what those are and give you the timing and how to work with that. But we had a lot going on, right? In this retrograde, we were in an eclipse zone the entire time, more or less. And wow, I mean, I haven't had a retrograde like this in a long time. And I'm sure maybe for you, you're feeling the same way. And I would say the world hasn't either, because what we're looking at is not just happening in you, it's happening in everywhere in us, in the synchronistic way life rolls through, how we're all interconnected. So we're going to be looking at the main themes. And I want you just for now to track back to March 18th. Seems like a long time ago. Not so much for me, but it might seem like a long time ago for you. And the reason why I'm having you do that is because that's when the setup phase began, or the Mercury retrograde zone started, was March 18th. So go back just and sense for yourself, before I even get into anything here, what was going on in your life? What was coming up from that time until now as a theme? So when we get thematic, we're really getting archetypal. We want to get into what was going on, why was this going on, what does it mean, and how it may have come in multiple different packages, right? Multiple synchronicities or events. Yet, if you got symbolic, which is to say archetypal, then you could see, wow, you know what? This was and is something that I have to look at from a different point of view in terms of the consistency of the theme. Like, it might come in different packages, but for example, if you've been having really painful twists and turns in some of your most fundamental and important relationships in your life, I want you to look at what is the one consistent or couple consistent things about each of those relationship situations. And I'm going to guide you right into what I'm here to offer you as insight, because that is where you're going to find your pivot, your awakening. And true to a Mercury retrograde midpoint, this is the day where the sun and Mercury meet up in the sky. And in astrology, we call this a conjunction. And so this is when there's this burst and connecting moment of revelation. So for some of you, this video right here might be just that. I might be guiding you into everything that connects all that's happened since March 18th in your life. And it really before then, because we're going into the whole of your life in some way. And all that's trying to shift, however, at this time. And when that kind of clock for it to shift started on March 18th. So let me just freestyle in it here. Think of, all right, what were some of the themes? Were there any relationship dynamics going on? Did you have any accidents? And then there's themes from that. Did you have, anything at all? Now I'm going to pull in the archetype of Aries. And I'm going to introduce you to the fundamental aspect of Aries that is totally activated right now. And the most important thing to begin considering to get into the core of this Mercury retrograde, and that is identity. In astrology, Aries represents identity. It's when we're born. It's the very first breath you take into this life. What happens? Well, most of the time when you're born, you're given a name. You are given a first formed sense of identity through a name. Now, that is the nature of the Aries archetype at its core. But additionally, it's about identity as we relate to it from the point of view of how do you relate to your own sense of self? Like, what is your sense of personal identity? If I were to ask you, I want you to name the top 5 identities that you meet life through. What would you say they are? And this might take some time. The Mercury retrograde midpoint isn't just all is revealed per se. It's a core moment when a lot clicks in. And then the rest of the retrograde till April 25th from here, we then take a minute and go, okay, well, I just got this huge download and blast of revelation around dynamics, themes, and challenges and issues around identity in my life. Now, you might be going, I'm not connecting yet, Robert. Great, that's fine. I'm going to get you. Because identity is a facet of all of our lives. All the signs in astrology represent core developmental facets of what it means to become a, I would say, mystically mature adult as a human being. If I went from Aries to Pisces, I could track in each archetype steps of development along the way. Aries is when we first start with identity. And when we're born, now, next level of evaluation, when we're born, just like we're given a name, we're also given more than a name. We're given multiple identities at once. Once your soul begins its incarnation into this matrix of Earth School, you just incarnated into culture, society, family, all the patterns therein, and the patterns, if you will, that were managing and co-creating reality before you arrived. You just arrived into a matrix of patterns, which include, most notably, multiple levels of identity. Now, the journey, I'm being simplistic, but the core level of a mystical journey of maturation is to begin with the identities that were given to you through fate. Meaning, once you arrive into your family, your society, and your culture, and wherever you are on the timeline in history and all that's going on at that moment, and then you're part of this new co-creative evolution on what is the human timeline journey. Once that's all established, you don't get to reverse that. It's already done. That's called fate. It's like, hey, these are the cards that your soul chose, by the way, as the soul agreement to work with, and destiny is how you play the hand. Destiny is also how you contact the mystical self through your maturation through life to play that hand as a co-creator. That's the gig. And so if you don't understand the enormous power of identity, then one, you don't understand Aries as an archetype. Two, you don't understand how identity is the key to clear intuition, to knowing your inner compass or not, to being hijacked by some tribal toxic dynamic, or staying centered in the soul self, being able to make consciously free-willed decisions. All of this pivots around identity. So I want you to now take a minute and see if there's some connections starting to happen. And now evaluate your life. We've got many more things to cover here, but I want you now to evaluate your life and go, okay, wow. If this Mercury retrograde, this is how big this retrograde is, deals with identity, then that also means it deals with purpose. I want you to ask yourself some questions here that maybe you've never thought of before. One, all right, I want you to keep in mind, I'm having you track multiple identities, right? Now go to culture and society. What did culture and society gift you with? That could be a euphemism in terms of identity. So when you were born into your family, what were the identities that were really active in your family line? What about your society and culture? Did you come from any religious identities? Was that something you grew up in? I'm a child of the 70s. That was definitely active. I went to Catholic grade school and high school. There you go. Multiple identities up in there. And then let's just start from a metacultural level with the truth that we live in a patriarchy. What identities are patriarchal, and what identities are adaptations to patriarchal wounding? And which of those are alive in you? Which of those allow guidance in and block guidance? I'm teaching a masterclass on vertical intuition right now. This is a course I put together. If you want to get in it, the doors are actually still open because I did hurt myself. So you can actually get into that still. And I'm covering, one of the massive pieces I cover is the power of identity and intuitive distortions. How clear your intuition has everything to do with how you roll with identity. And this is the key in a retrograde. The retrograde brings up what's unconscious in you about it. So I got to hop over out of identity next into what we do through identity, and that's we relate through identity. So this recruits in, and it was just beautifully and perfectly mirrored in the eclipse zone. The full moon lunar eclipse that we had in Libra relationships, and then the recent new moon solar eclipse that we had in Aries identity. this axis between my identity, who I feel I am, and how I relate to others through that is absolutely active and alive. Now, I'm going to give examples because the truth is you have more than one identity. We have multiple identities. One of mine, for example, is astrologer, but I'm also an intuitive. I'm also a teacher. I'm also a guide. I've also worked as a counselor. I've got multiple, those are all identities. And in a sense, you could look at those and think, okay, all right, which of those feel like, if not maybe all of them, feel pretty neutral? You know, they could be something primarily that you express your sense of self through in a positive and nourishing and connecting way when it comes to how you relate to life. So relationship, archetype of relationship here, isn't just one-on-one romantic. You relate to all of life. And yes, you relate to self. All of this is active. And now you want to look at, okay, purpose, which is, by the way, a verb. Life purpose, which, by the way, you have a soul agreement to engage in. There's a plan. There's definitely a plan. But purpose evolves. How does purpose evolve? It evolves through your empowerment, stages of empowerment and awakening, and how conscious as a co-creator you can be. Now, am I saying anything you haven't already experienced? I would bet probably not at all. You've evolved through purpose the whole of your life. And this retrograde is a crossroads of evolution. And what's being triggered is the shadow side of you that doesn't understand some of the identities you have going on and how they are blocking purpose. They may have served. I don't want to make identity right or wrong. It's not either, really. But can we get locked into, for example, which I'm going to get into, a wounded ego identity? Hell yeah. And can that wounded ego identity keep us from a clear sense of direction in our purpose? Absolutely. So what identities have got you snagged, and how is that being mirrored in something I call shadow dancing in relationships, where you're getting triggered, you're finding someone else is triggered, you're watching things just go crazy in terms of left turn that you didn't see coming, right turn you didn't see coming, end of a relationship you didn't see coming. And then what are you left with when a relationship ends? Now track your own experience here. You're left with the identity. If you take a minute to take a breath with the breakup, quote unquote, you're left with the identity that you created that relationship through. And you're left with, well, this was painful. This felt like fate, not destiny. This felt like sabotage territory. This felt draining. This felt whatever it was, violating, codependent, certainly not empowering or nourishing. Okay, your intuitive system is talking to you. You've got an identity now that it's time to neutralize. It's time to put it to bed. And now source a new one that's trying to be born so that you can relate through that to other people as you move forward from here and to all of life. What would something like that do? What would shifting from one identity that, let's say, it was a sabotaging one for you, it created sabotaging relationship magnetics. It repelled positive, nourishing people away and drew in narcissists, vampires, repeats of childhood and all the roles of the parental roles that childhood wired in. And then suddenly, boom, the relationships you have created out of that, they end up in a 2x4 wake-up call crisis. And what are you left with? You can either evolve or repeat. All retrogrades, all life crossroads are evolve or repeat question mark moment. Like, am I going to evolve or repeat? If you're going to evolve, then you are going to have to look at identity, because whatever identity got you into a certain level of living, choice, action, magnetics with people, relationship dynamics, intimacy dynamics, whatever identity got you there, it can't take you forward to something new. That's just straight up technical truth. So now you feel in the retrograde a little bit. And by the way, let's take a minute outside of just me coming into your field and asking some questions. These dynamics play out on the world stage of cultural identities, of religious identities, of political identities. And are we not seeing some shit go down in that arena? Oh yeah, which I'll maybe reference a bit later. But my point is, this is holographic. It plays out everywhere. Identity is part of life. It's everywhere. Now, I want to ping you with a question to summon whether you have this false belief. And if you do, I want you to drop it. All right, so tracking back to identity. First of all, what is identity? Have you ever asked that question? It's such a seemingly simple question, but whoa. What is identity? Where did my identities come from? Who am I? And I don't want generic answers like, I'm spirit, I'm soul. No. That's not taking responsibility for your own journey through identity as a co-creator. Give me an identity. Don't give me generic bypass crap. I want to know, what are your identities? Let's do this. And most notably, which ones are active and where did they come from? Now, there's identities you have, that I have, that we all have, that are absolutely saboteurs. And we may not even relate consciously to the fact that they are identities for us. So if you live, for example, which is very empowered in our culture, from a shadow victim identity, that means you're living from some sort of belief that you're a victim. Life owes you, everyone owes you. The balance of the scales needs to be addressed because it's been imbalanced via what's happened to you in your life. And you're going to use victim identity versus, hey, I've had some victimizing experiences, but you know what? I'm not going to let them create an identity for me. No, our culture actually says double down on that, create an identity from that, get litigious if possible, and let's just now get into this trigger economy that's all alive and well, where we're triggered by everything and intentionally triggered by political toxic tribal parties and news media and social media to stay engaged through triggering. And that's a way in. What can trigger you has everything to do with identity. This is how we stay polarized in left versus right, while all the politicians get to do whatever the hell they want, instead of us asking them to be accountable to the polis, to the people. So there's a little political crumb of what's afoot right now. And how we use history and our identities from history to commit atrocities in a place called Gaza right now. And go all over the map with this. And that's a victim-based approach. We were victimized, we're entitled. But that's shadow victim. We all have a victim in us. And this is just one example of how identity can roll. And that victim is an intuitive guide that says, hey, stay empowered and alert to someone hurting you, harming you, victimizing you as much as possible as a great survival skill. Wonderful. You need that. But as soon as we start coming up with language, that shouldn't have happened, this should have happened instead. Why me? Why not me? That is the language of the victim archetype. And hey, you may agree or disagree with what I'm saying right now. I have a question for you. Past all that, does it empower you to ask those questions? Why didn't it happen this way? Why did this happen? It should have happened this way. Is that an empowering statement? What about this happened? There's a reason. And I just offer a prayer to be availed of that reason. And also, I pray, don't let this define me. When we say we're not defined by our past, well, are you? Because if I can pull out identities that are from your past that are alive in you right now, you certainly are. And this is a journey for all of us. Trust me. I'm telling you. Took a bike accident to wake up to a big blind side I had. So we're all in good company. But technically speaking, I'm getting into this retrograde through what Aries actually is. It is first and foremost where identity begins for every human being. It is the first sign of the zodiac. It is the first stage of human ego development. So let's track again a little bit more about where you're at with just the general sense of identity as a concept, as a force, as a truth of life. All right. Now, when it comes to identity, I want you to consider, have you ever asked, well, what is my purpose? Of course you have. All right. And then have you connected a dot in terms of what purpose is and how you express yourself in a way that is purposeful? And what I'm going to offer you here is that your purpose is found in your identities. My purpose as a teacher is expressed through my teacher archetype, my teacher identity. My purpose as an astrologer, same thing. Intuitive, same thing. You express purpose through a pattern, an archetype, we could call it, and an identity. So when we're looking at purpose, all right, so you express your purpose via identity. Now, what as a human being expresses your identities? Let me answer that for you. Oh, it's your ego. It's the human ego. Now, I'm going to catch you on a blind side you might suffer from because it's very empowered in spirituality and self-help, and that is the bashing and demonization of the human ego. Not helpful. First of all, you need one. You need a healthy human ego because that's how you're going to express your purpose. How else are you going to express your purpose but through some sense of you? And the identity's in there. So are you tripped up already? You've been, I'm doing ego eradicator meditations and always talking about ego versus soul. No, ego and soul. The human ego is a part of basic 101 human psychology. It's not going anywhere. And you know what? You're going to do a lot better to befriend it. Now, dropping down to another level of truth within here. Hey, is there maybe some problems and challenges with the wounded side of the human ego? Absolutely. And that's something also to address. What are your identities that write a wounded story for you in your life? Now, I'm going to pause button because I'm bringing in the word wound and wounded, words wound and wounded, because this last eclipse happened with Chiron right there. Chiron in Aries. So we're in this retrograde because the eclipse zone's inside of it. We are in an activation and exploration regarding our potential that demands a discussion around this question. Do my identities wound me or heal me? Am I writing a wounded story in my life and calling it empowerment and this and that when it's just a wounded cover story? It's you on repeat. Or am I actually writing a heroic story, a story of healing? Well, I'll tell you what, you know who your storytellers are? Your identities. And you can sit there and tell me a story and I'll read right through it immediately and break it down technically into what's writing the story for you. Not right, wrong, good, or bad, but technically and karmically speaking, wounded stories perpetuate wounded magnetics, wounded repeat cycles, and keep you stuck in what you know. And now add on to that, we're banishing and bashing the human ego itself, where identity is meant to express through. You see how we're stuck? So one of the truths I would ask you to explore for yourself, a very big thought reversal based truth is, hey, let's embrace that the human ego is amazing. And you know what? You need to befriend it. And you need to come to know it as the partial story writer. If it as the thing the soul does indeed write stories through. It ain't going anywhere. Those saying that you should get rid of your ego seem to be tripping up all over their own. So you know what? I'm just not a fan psychologically with this in any shape or form, spiritually with this notion we shouldn't have an ego. It's like deleting Aries out of the zodiac. No. So if that's something you unconsciously subscribed to or believed in, I'm just asking you to challenge that. Because I'm going to tell you technically, as an intuitive with 10,000 readings behind me and counting, I've seen this loop people again and again and again. You need an identity. You need a human ego to express that through. So let's get conscious about it. And that's what this retrograde in part is also offering. Now, dipping into the wounded side of the human ego. Where do wounded identities come from? Well, oftentimes from trauma, from family legacies of trauma, ancestral legacies of trauma, cultural legacies of trauma. We have so many wounded stories playing out now in political arenas and laws with abortion, etc., that deal with patriarchal wounding stories and all sorts of things, and religious stories that have told us from birth we're fucked because you know what, you have original sin, original shame, I call it, and you know what, you'll never be good enough. So get redeeming yourself with Jesus, someone, to get back to the garden of enoughness. And we can think, because we're not a practicing Catholic or Christian in some way or whatever, because this plays out in lots of different areas. I think it plays out equally in some ways in some forms of Buddhism as it does in Christianity, as it does in Islam. It goes all across the board. And if you don't have a core sense of what I call soul esteem, I'm enough no matter what. It's my nature to be enough. This is non-negotiable because it can't be negotiated. It's my nature. It's the truth of me. Enoughness is my truth, period. And then if you don't really sense that, which in a shame-based culture, many of us don't, right? Then we now have a wounded identity managing the fact that we don't believe at our base core sense of who we are, that we're enough. What are some of your identities that manage that for you? You got a people pleaser? Do you have a shadow rescuer? Are you somebody who is a blood donor? Are you somebody that's an overgiver? These are unconscious patterns, i.e. identities, that run your esteem system. And this, especially with Aries, Mercury retrograde in Aries is like, oh, no. You need to warrior up here and pioneer Aries archetypes, a new sense of self that's willing to leave behind tribal conditioning and wounding to go into a different sense of who you are, leave your family systems, venture out on your heroic quest to run on soul esteem and neutralize and let go of any identities that are managing your esteem and managing your esteem. Because at core, what they're really managing is a belief you don't believe you're enough, which is reinforced every day on Instagram, reinforced every day in politics, reinforced every day everywhere. So this is a massive Mercury retrograde. Are you feeling it? That one cycle like this could take us to an underworld where we have to actually have a council with our table of self and all the identities that run our lives as co-creators. And most notably with the Mercury retrograde, unconsciously. And now go, okay, I have to retire some of you here. And I want you to know something, just as a truth I've seen. You don't get rid of patterns and identities per se. They've already wired into your brain. The perfectionist in you's already got wiring that's modeled itself and molded into your brain. This is neuroscience. You don't get rid of brain wiring. You can deactivate it and rewire something different to manage your life, but it'll always be there. So I don't want you coming into this counsel and guidance I'm giving you with your perfectionist going, well, I got to get rid of these identities. You don't get rid of them. In my classroom, you hug your dragons. And that's how you deactivate them. Because at one point in time, it's very possible when you were a child or your ancestors, this might be true for them, these patterns and identities saved your/their ass. You had nothing else to run life through and co-creation through. But this retrograde's saying, hey, now you do. But do you want the new? And that's a question that this crossroads is asking. Do you want to go into something new? And what would that new be? Don't define the new via the terms of the old. That's not how the new works. You're going to have to go into a place of being nobody, not knowing exactly who you are, feeling your way through it, and allowing this organic spiritual process to happen where a new identity starts to download, or you start to pattern with, and then you're on your way. Now, I want to bring in some charts and some dates, and I also just want to take a minute and say hi to everybody, because this is a social live, and make sure I'm actually streaming and you're hearing me correctly while I drink a little something. Then I'll tell you about my bike accident real quick. So how is everybody doing? Oh my, we have so many people here. Wow, this is probably my most watched live ever. Hey everyone. So, hey Barbara Bongard, I see you there. Griselda, we got a Tim in the house on YouTube. Lisa Webb, Carolyn Willman. Oh, we got a comment up here, and I don't even know how that happened. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. That's annoying. Not that the comment was bad. I didn't even see what it was. I'm not sure how that happened. I must have pressed something. It's been a totally Mercury retrograde getting started, ready and started for this. So I'm gonna share with you my story as we come into the stats and dates of the retrograde, because this is actually quite phenomenal. So let me show you the exact dates. I'm going to walk through these to give you a sense of where you are now in all of this, with where we all are now in all of this with the timing, but also where the timing goes next, and where I want to pull in everything I've just said onto a timeline. All right. And then we're going to do some more deepening here and look at some different pieces. All right. So these are the Mercury retrograde in Aries full stats. And I hope to God I got these right. It is a retrograde, so I will correct as needed. All right. The whole retrograde itself goes from April 1st through April 25th, which I've already just told you. Now, I had planned on speaking a retrograde, and I'll see if I can actually give this a shot. I'd planned on showing you where to find this in your chart via my second camera, only to find right before I went live that my second camera was dead, and I can't get it to run on a plug-in power until some of the battery power has been restored. So anyway, we'll see if I can get it up shortly. But when you're looking at this, I want you now, once again, set a phase started March 18th. And that was when Mercury, and you can see that magenta line there with a Mercury symbol and Aries up above it. This is when the retrograde started at 16 degrees in terms of the retrograde zone. Now, the official retrograde itself didn't happen until April 1st at 27 degrees. And that's where you see that magenta line sort of snake back. And that's the retrograde happening, and things start going backward with Mercury in the sky. Now, the midpoint of the cycle, as you're watching this with me live, is today, April 11th at 22 degrees Aries. But here's something very unique, and I think worthy of talking about. Flipping to real quick, the eclipses. Let's just look at March real quick. So this eclipse occurred on March 25th. This was the first of the set of eclipses. Eclipses happen in usually pairs. Once in a while you get 3, but very rarely. This was a full moon lunar eclipse in Libra. Now, I'm just putting this up for now to show you the date. And this is where we start to establish basically a 2-week eclipse zone that goes from the setup phase of the Mercury retrograde into the actual Mercury retrograde. And as you probably know, because this just happened, we just had the new moon solar eclipse on April 8th, just 3 days ago. But when you look at that, if you know how to read a chart correctly, you'll see the sun and the moon by each other. Actually, you can kind of see that moon sign. It's more easy to maybe tell. And then you're going to see at 19 degrees, 24 minutes. That's astrological degrees of a circle. And that, a zodiac sign as part of a 360-degree circle. And what that shows is that's the degree where the eclipse occurred in Aries. Now, what's going to happen is that Mercury is still going backward. From today, it goes backward further. It's 22 degrees. So it's going to go back and hit that 19 degrees. And that's on April 15th. And that's what this is within this graph. So on April 15th, we end up at 19 degrees. I've got 48 seconds there, Aries. But it's really in that same zone. And this just brings a different focus and I think enhanced sense of activation to all the things I've been talking about. So what I want you to consider is, all right, basically what this breaks down as is there's been these things going on, and it's really incumbent upon you to kind of consider, all right, how does this apply to me? What's been going on with me and my relationships? And so this is where you take everything I just said, this puts it into the actual astronomy and astrology of it. And then now we bring it back to the life you live. And also the events happening in culture. And so I'll speak to the eclipse zone a little bit shortly, because I definitely want to touch on Chiron and Aries, which is something that I don't think is talked about from this angle of what I'm presenting now, very often, if at all, by other astrologers. And I want you to consider, in terms of your own life, that this midpoint is important. It's the beginning and really opening of a door of insight and revelation into some part of yourself regarding the Aries area, i.e. areas of identity that are needing shift in your life. Yet, there's even more, because what this new moon solar eclipse was about. So let's go to that chart and let me talk you through some of its energy. It's going to, now, true to retrograde, I'm going to go from that chart to the one before it, because it actually makes more sense in terms of the sequence here. But coming to this recent point, now that's actually the chart right there of where you will find on April 15th, the Mercury at 19 degrees, 48 minutes, hitting that same point of the actual new moon solar eclipse that I showed you here. And so what I want you to consider here is that whatever has been coming up for you, there's a deeper level of alchemy to consider. And it is Aries alchemy. In fact, let me show you, because I wanted to do a live event and I had images made for this, but unfortunately my surgery and injury took that away from me. But this is what I was going to have you explore in an event with me regarding this eclipse, because this is the question it really asks. Are you being wounded or healed by your identity? Now, take a minute with that. What identities continue to wound you? And by wound you, I mean, what does wounding mean? What does the word wounding mean? To me, in this instance, I'm going to define it as something that ruptures or violates your own holism. There's a lot of ways. I mean, we can medically define wounding. We could, and even then I think you're going to find, well, the holism of your health, the holism of your body, the holism of your skin, the holism of your bones, something gets broken, ruptured, violated. If we could go into different kinds of arenas with wounding, but something has ruptured a sense of, or wounded a sense of, hey, I am already whole. So what identities do you have that manage the lie you're not already whole? Those keep you wounded. They keep telling a wounded story. They keep you in certain wounding magnetics with others in relationships. That's a huge way to go into this moment right now. What identities are managing the truth that you believe the lie you're not already whole? That's not to fault you. We've been programmed and are programmed every day with the message we're not already whole. Now, when I say whole, be very clear. I don't mean perfect. I don't mean even special. I mean, you're enough. This is an esteem holism to me. Esteem-based holism. You're enough. And we do believe in the lie that we're not. And then, okay, there's karma for that. And there's also identities that manage that. What are they for you? What manages that you don't believe you're enough? I just talked about being perfect, and not being perfect not being perfect is not connected to being whole. You can be whole and be effed up. Who knew? So what manages, however, like the perfectionist, the lie you're not enough. I'm not enough unless I'm perfect. So as a strategy to be enough, let me be perfect. Well, where did that come from? Well, it's cultural, societal, and based, I think, in terms of our history, deeply in a lot of religious traditions, but yet also it's still very rampant today. Why do people got to put 10 filters on their Instagram posts and this and that and present something? Ugh. And you can do that. There's karma for that. I don't know if it's a connecting thing to do, but that's your journey to figure out. And so this is what I want you to evaluate. What patterns manage? Now, let me go into from here where most of us first experienced devastating levels of core wounding within our holism, and that's childhood. I'm going to focus on that for a sec, but I do want to just mention we could jump back into ancestry as well. Depending on your ancestral legacy lineage, where your ancestors come from, especially in a culture that privileges people with fairer skin, etc., and certain sexualities and gender identities, etc. Hey, there's a lot here that we can consider. So you do want to be open to, hey, where this began for me, this idea that I'm not enough? Oh, 5 generations before I was born into this family line. It's probably true for everybody in some measure or other. But if you go to your actual childhood, this lifetime, what do you find? And that's where you start to see, okay, to survive childhood, what did I have to adapt as an identity? Or what did I have to adapt as a pattern? That over time just became identity, unconsciously. This is a retrograde. So retrogrades always are about going into the unconscious side of your psyche, the shadow. That's the whole point. It's the Hermes psychopompous journey into the underworld. Now, in the underworld here, you find new whispers of potential, new whispers of different relationships you could have, new whispers of connection, new whispers of empowerment and esteem. And this time, those whispers are speaking to you through the language of Aries. And true to Hermes, Mercury retrogrades always bring a message on behalf of all the larger activated archetypal cycles right now. So Mercury retrograde in Aries is bringing absolutely a message on behalf of Chiron in Aries, Eris in Aries, Pluto journeying right into Aquarius, Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, Uranus in Taurus, Jupiter in Taurus, and going into Gemini this year. This retrograde is talking, just imagine, get this image, Hermes, Mercury, talking to all these bigger forces. Got a message for me? Got a message for me? All right. I'm going to do this through Aries this time. The message is going to go through Aries, but thanks. Got it. Boom. And here's your retrograde. And then, yeah, it's you. It's your timeline. It is your psyche that is going through this too. So, and I could speak to many and multiple things regarding this, but I'm focusing on identity because I don't think anyone else has. And it's where I have some skill. So, all right, we're in this now. And this is about looking at your own sense of personal identities and where they come from. And absolutely, we've got to revisit childhood. So did you have alcoholic parents? And out of that, you, I call it downloaded the adult child archetype to manage your parents, to hopefully get them to be adults enough to take care of you so that you would survive childhood. Because you know what? I'm 5, I can't get a job. I'm 5, I can't pay the rent. I'm 5, I can't fill in the blank. So maybe if I can manage them somehow. And okay, now there's an adult child identity. Is that conscious in you? If this applies, extrapolate for your own examples. And if it isn't conscious, how do you know that? Well, this is what Mercury retrogrades do so damn well. They bring synchronicities. So when you hear these, oh, it's Mercury retrograde, surface level, superficial / bordering on superstitious stuff, like it's just miscommunications and delays and accidents. I want you to know that's useless. So what? What am I supposed to do with that? How does that empower me? Well, just be careful with your communications. Superstition. I'll tell you what's technically going on here is that this is how Hermes works in trickster form. This is how this archetype works. And imagine the archetype is part of the world psyche, Gaia's creative matrix. It's part of creation here. You've got a Mercury force. We do. It's called the human mind. And then Mercury goes retrograde. Well, what does that mean? What it means is it's time for you to put the mind aside to be informed by a greater intelligence, i.e. intuition, soul whispers, whatever works for you, something bigger than your mind. And then, now if you believe the mind's all that, now you're really in trouble because it ain't. Now then you go into that and then you've got to go, okay, well, this is about the Aries part of my mind and how I think within the Aries arena of life. And Aries is an interesting archetype, generally speaking. It's not all that embraced, and then it's also exalted and adored. Both and. Be the pioneer. We love you as we shoot arrows into your back. Well, we'll love you when you're dead. Thanks. Thanks for all that you did. Now, this isn't always true. But when we start to look at, well, what is Aries about? How do we relate to that in our lives? Do you relate to healthy self-aggression? If I say the word aggression at all, are you put off? Well, you've got an Aries challenge then, because there is healthy self-aggression. There's healthy fighting the good fight. The warrior archetype has its place in co-creation, does it not? The knight, and yeah, the pioneer, the advocate. And then let's go to some shadow ones, the bully and the procrastinator, the person that just doesn't do anything. Yeah, so there's a lot of room in here for us to examine as technicians, and that's the key. What arena of our lives and the identities in it Aries is about. And I want to land you here more than anywhere. And that is because it's personal to all of us. And I think it's part of our archetypal pattern and journey, because it's part of what Joseph Campbell identified as the journey of life, period. And that is the heroine and hero. Those are Aries archetypes. So if I were to land you in those, does the heroine have to fight? Is there risk? Is there going into the unknown? Is there at some point descent into the underworld to meet a minotaur? Absolutely. Do I have to go engage a dragon? You do. And yet I'm going to tell you, don't slay it, hug it. And Joseph Campbell would say the same thing. Because behind that dragon, when you hug a shadow identity, it reveals what it had been managing for you. And then you're gifted with the treasure of how to do something different. And the treasure of you're enough no matter what. You've always been enough. You want to lay down your sword here and just hug this dragon and let it step aside, and then you see the soul esteem right behind it. I could frame this all in a question. I want you to evaluate your intentionality, your ambition, all Aries things. your will, an Aries aspect of identity, what drives you, your drivers, conscious and unconscious. And I want you to bring all of that into awareness and put it before this question. If I said to you, here's the truth, you're enough, no matter what. So I want you to ask this question. If I am enough, no matter what do I do with this drive, all this ambition, all this striving, all of this Aries energy and how I've been using it in either a hypo or hyper way? If I'm enough no matter what, now what? And what that metric might give you, that question as a metric, is I have been initiating action, doing things, making plans and goals. If I'm honest, I'll go back to January when I set down my New Year's resolutions, plans, and goals. If I'm honest, all of them had a piece of me trying to get to enough in them. And if I got real, maybe I don't want this goal. This isn't in harmony with my soul level of identity. What's the soul level of identity? Let's say, versus a wounded ego level of identity. These are questions here. They're right in your face. So this is where you go, all right, I've got to do some soul searching. All Mercury retrogrades bring it up in some way. But this is a fire element retrograde. It is the very first identity our souls agreed to step into when we were born via a name and a journey through a body and a family and a culture and a society that were the fate, the cards we chose to be dealt so we could find a destiny within it all. Here we are. This is that crossroads. This is the crossroads of life, frickin' purpose. And you have to know, technically speaking, life purpose is expressed through your human ego, as is all of your identities that carry the purpose. Where are you at in that? So while everyone was looking up at the eclipse, which was pretty cool to see so many people come together, I saw an unconscious longing to see and remember, hey, I was born for many reasons, and I think I'm a bit off track. This culture and world is getting more and more off track. And if I were to ask you, why do you think that is? I mean, one thing I'd have you explore is look at the toxic side of identity, the shadow identities that are out in social media, in politics. So when someone says radical left, radical right, that's shadow territory. Don't buy into it. It's immediately assumed from someone like that independents politically don't exist. If you're for a policy this way or that way, you immediately, by polarized identities, are seen through that polarization. It never occurs to anyone you're thinking for yourself. You're not part of any political party. You're just going with the soul-centered sense of what you feel serves holism the most when it comes to policy, rights, wars. So everything I'm saying is playing out right now in absolute unfortunate detail. And you've got to choose, and all of this aside, do you? And what side is that? What side is that? These are the questions to really explore. So, and juicy and like, whoa. So, where are you at in all of this? Where are you at? Let's take a minute, take a breath. I'm going to look at, write some questions here if you have any about where I have been already. And as you do that, I will come back to this stats graph and talk through the rest of these dates. And then I want to talk about Jupiter conjunct Uranus and Taurus, because that's coming up here. Also quite notable within the retrograde. So April 15th, we hit this new moon solar eclipse degree. And as I had already previously showed you, sort of by accident, but maybe not, here is the chart for that. Now, this chart shows, if you look, and you know what? I do seem to have my camera working now, so I'm going to try to talk and get ready to show you maybe some things on there at the same time, God's willing. But as you look at this, I want you to consider that there is so much in Aries. If you don't know astrology very well, I can present this to you real quick. This is an actual breakdown of the symbols. If you're watching the video, you could pause it, take a screenshot, something like that, and then go back and watch the video to track better. There's the signs of the zodiac and the planets there. And then this shows you the wheel. So that'll help you decode it a little better. So I'm trying to find a balance here between those that know astrology more and those that don't. And, still give everybody some hopefully amazing insights and coordinates here. However, coming back to this, that is a lot of Aries, to say the least. You've got Venus, you have got the North Node, Chiron, and I want you to notice that where is Mercury? Well, it's in an exact conjunction with Chiron at 19 degrees, 48 minutes. All right, so we're going to talk about Chiron a little bit. And the truth be told, I've already been talking about Chiron a lot. But I want you to consider this from the point of view of, coming back to this question. Are you being wounded or healed by your identities? Let's say identities now. And how do you evaluate that at all? Well, which ones bring more connection? Which ones push connection away? Which ones bring you more to loving yourself unconditionally? Which identities create conditions for self-love? Which ones keep you anchored in present time? Which identities have you out in time loops, time warps, but everywhere but here? Which identities are about managing your sense that you're not enough? Which identities express, not manage, but express that you are enough? Which identities sit on top of some sense of I'm enough no matter what in you and express that out? That's a healing identity. That's actually a channel of grace right there. But you got ones that are managing, I got to get to enough. This is how I'll do it. I'll people please. How many likes, how many whatever. I will rescue. I'll shadow rescue. I'll blood donate. I'll codependent it in. I will, whatever I got to do. All right. Just karma for that. It sucks, by the way. And that continues to wound you, i.e. you are now living, albeit perhaps unconsciously, but maybe now consciously, in an identity that violates your own holism. And therefore, oftentimes, the holism of other people. Do you think you're serving the holism of a vampire? Someone who has that archetype by being a blood donor? You're actually not. Do you think you're serving the holism of someone when you are acting as their parent and they're an adult? Maybe it's your actual parents and you keep parenting them because that's the pattern you adapted to survive that childhood you had with them. Do you think you're serving them growing up into their own holism as mystically mature adults? No, you're not. That's some way to begin the journey of differentiation around, hey, what's actually wounding me or others versus empowering me and healing me and others. And the core thing that I've really come to understand these last weeks, it comes down to also connection, esteem and connection. We need each other. And that's the interesting paradox of Aries, which in its shadow side can think, I don't need anybody. I'm the pioneer. No. We all need each other. Nothing teaches you that like having a really bad injury or bike accident. And then you get to see those that actually show up when you need them. and those that don't. And then not to judge it per se, though it can hurt, but then to go, why is it that they're not showing up? Why is it when I need something after all my overgiving, they're not around? And that question will change your life. And the answer to that question and living in that answer will change everything. So you can extrapolate from that for yourself and whatever is going on with you in your relationships, etc. That's why, I mean, there's so much going on. It's a synchronistic mirror of this is a massive crossroads. So Chiron in Aries, and those of you who have this in your natal chart, it is your Chiron return, which we get at 50. Hello. And this is the time to come to understand identity is so powerful. It can wound and it can heal. It can disconnect. It can connect. It can cause someone to commit atrocities in war. It can cause a country or its leaders. It can cause someone to poison a radical love rebel, Alexei Navalny. Identity is at the core of it all. It can either determine what you hear as intuitive guidance and what you block, how you see someone in the holism and truth of their soul self, or whether you label them a libtard or a radical right gun-toting Republican. We got to stop it, right? We want something new. It starts with you and me. We can't wait for everyone else to get it. You want to be your hero or heroine. You know how that happens? You bring the treasure back from your journey and serve the people through it. And I don't think we're serving anybody in name calling and divisiveness and covering up for egregious aggression that's being apparently justified by, an act of war. We've got to come to some different fulcrum here, right? Now, having said that, I want to talk about Jupiter conjunct Uranus. So before I get there, I want you to understand, one of the reasons why you didn't hear from me for a while, because it's been months since I've actually done a video, I was busy teaching a 12-part incredible astrological forecasting guide for this year. And I want you to know about this because it is this video times 12. There's 12 parts. And right now it's 50% off. You can go to my website and check it out. That's what's sponsoring this video. That sale is going to end in a number of days right after the eclipse point is reached. And I, for the first time, created an actual e-workbook. I've never done this. It's 50 pages. It's pretty damn cool and amazing, I must say. And I go into numerous depths within all that's happening right now. So I go into all the planets and I go into, all the different cycles. Pluto moving into Aquarius, Neptune in Pisces, getting ready to go into Aries, which is quite profound. Uranus in Taurus. I also offer things you've never, I guarantee you, heard about Eris and Aries, which I used to not even cover until a couple years ago. And I go into the next set of eclipses in the fall, and it's the whole year. The whole entire year. So there's a link within the video here, video description. Click on it. A few more days, you get half off. I can't say enough about it. This year is crazy in terms of all that's happening and all that's ahead. We got a Mars retrograde coming up in the fall. I cover that too. Jupiter goes into Gemini. I cover that too. So go check it out. It's really worth your resources, time, and there's 12 parts. It is. If you like my astrology and you want to go into the deepest dive, there you go. I wasn't planning on even doing something that massive. And I cover the aspects and activations of each quarter in 2024. So the first quarter already ended, but everything exists in a continuum. We're in second quarter now. You could jump in and get your coordinates from April, May, June, and then all the way through the rest of the year. This is something I do plan on offering annually going forward. And I'm super excited about having created for the first time an actual ebook for it, and also the depth I actually went into. For example, just something to get your interest here going. I actually have redefined the signs Pisces and Aquarius outside of water and air. So if you want, if you're curious, like, what the hell is that? Yeah, I would really recommend you check it out. Okay, but coming back to Jupiter and Uranus. I actually have a chart here I want you to look at. So this happens, this aspect, coming back to this list, happens on the 20th. And, you know, it's happening just before the retrograde officially ends and Mercury stations direct. Super significant. And I go into a lot of depth in this aspect actually in the Polar Compass Astrological Guide for 2024 that I just mentioned, that forecast. What I'd like to gift you with, though, as a little bit from that, is I want you, we have an issue culturally, and I've seen it show up, obviously, I think in religion, but I've also seen it show up in astrology. And that is, we don't see the holism of things. It's just not how we're taught. And until you start to intuitively open yourself up to see the interconnectedness of life, and not only see it, study it, get curious about it, work with it. Until you do that, you don't understand just how we look at things as a heaven versus earth paradigm, or the skies versus earth paradigm, which is where astrology oftentimes goes. Instead of, we are in an interconnected, co-creative matrix, and astrology shows us timing within this earth dimension of it, shows us the archetypal forces that are part of the earth matrix herself. And it shows us, if you will, all that is part of Gaia's psyche and creativity and creative process. Has it ever occurred to you that Gaia has her own soul contract, has her own journey of co-creation? And we're just visiting and, yeah, participating as well. And we were lucky enough to get an invitation to be here. She said yes. Can you believe it? To human beings. So, yeah. Now that said, let's talk about Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is, in astrology, the earthiest of earth signs. It is, if you will, Gaia herself, in that sense of solid earth, material form, nature, Mother Earth. And then we could say Virgo is the ecosystem within Gaia. Virgo's all about systems. And so we've got this force that we often see through a bifurcation or a heaven versus earth paradigm, or some split versus integrative truth. And a lot of astrologies interpreted Uranus and Taurus through that split. And I think, ironically, the Uranus and Taurus cycle was about calling that out in part. So that if you're going to talk about a sky god or god of the celestial heavens, Uranus, and also Gaia, well, they are both interconnected forces that are in a co-creative marriage together. They're not versus anything. The radical, which is Uranus' way to start to understand the earth, is to understand the earth as just another dimensional matrix of co-creation that's connected to all the others and has no lesser or greater value than, let's say, quote unquote, heaven, or the energetic dimensions, or the galactic other federations out there and other alien, whatever. Miss me with it. Because what this is really about is the sacredness and a radical new way to see the sacredness of this planet that isn't also in hippy dippy territory either. We don't have time for that. The climate is saying that. So there's a deeper, perhaps, perspective for you to consider around Uranus and Taurus. And what I would offer is this conjunction that's coming up. What I think it is about. It's about what Uranus and Taurus has been trying to say this whole time. And Jupiter being this intuitive force in our psyche that is about the symbolic, integrative perspective of co-creation and the truths of co-creation. That's Jupiter. Coming into this and connecting with Uranus and saying, okay, folks, you're so busy trying to get up into space and go to Mars and all this stuff when you cannot see the gorgeous resources of the planet in front of you, and that you are not honoring its holism. Meaning, you're not living in harmony with the laws of Gaia, nature. And so there's a great article I'll have you Google, and I say this in the series that I did, where William Shatner went up into space on Bezos' rocket, right? Mr. Star Trek himself. And he had expected that it would be this incredible experience of seeing space and whoa, and oh my God, the grandeur, the creative awe of it all. And in this article where he was interviewed, he actually communicates the exact opposite happened to him. He says, this gets me emotional, that he looked out into space and all he felt in his genuine experience was cold, icy, black space. And then he looked back at the earth and he went, wow, why are we trying to get away from you? You're everything. You are everything. And we're trying to get out of here and get away from you and go to the moon and go to Mars and all. And it was a paradigm shift that he did not see coming. And I'm paraphrasing what you got to read the article. It had me bawling. But I want to tell you, that article is Uranus and Taurus. It is the radical, all right, let's use the heavens and celestial realm, sure, to look at what we have. And it's time to really understand that and the beauty of that and honor the holism of it. And so I actually, in my series, talked a lot about, which is already happening just yesterday and today, that I believe this is heralding a horrific cycle of extreme weather this spring. This transit represents that. And a wake-up call to go, when are we going to get it here? When are we going to get this? And how do we get it? How do we practically get it? Because I think there's practical things to consider. How are we going to have energy? How are we going to do this? I have to leave it there. But I want you for your own self to consider when we're looking at resources. Right now, there's a lot going on with inflation and different things about resources and survival and the earth and climate and extreme weather, all of it. Yeah. You want the tarot card, bolt of lightning, archetypal experience that Uranus is about? Well, how about this? How about it's the bolt of lightning that William Shatner had in space that makes you look at the earth instead of up there and go, wait a minute, this is the realm I have a soul contract. I came here to co-create here, and I've got to be here and what's true and real here, and stop ignoring natural law as if it's inconvenient. And I've got to actually understand there is a force called karma, not a force of punishment. It's just a neutral force of choice and consequence. And I have been working with this, and we all have, in a very mismanaged, horrific way that does not honor the Earth's holism. There you go. And out of that, what Jupiter always offers is a seed of a new beginning. And I'll offer you this, because this is already happening. Jupiter is about goals. Jupiter is about the bigger picture, having vision, having confidence, faith, and trust in yourself and what's possible within the greater design and plan of life to fulfill goals and go out there and express purpose. But here's the thing. What's Taurus about? It's about gardening, farming. It's about planting seeds. And I want you to just take a minute with the archetype of the gardener and the farmer. You cannot grow a seed in an inhospitable climate or soil. If we don't have some way to stabilize many things in this life, war, climate, extreme weather, and change, well, you might have a goal to go buy and build a house, right on the coast of Florida. Not a goal I'd have, because you're not considering the holism of what's happening, and that maybe you won't even be able to live there in 10 years. But we think in our narcissism, and bigger picture is always Jupiter's game, that it's just about me and my goals and whether I'm aligned. And you better look at the soil you're planting that in, and whether it's toxic or becoming toxic, and whether it's going to support something growing in your life. Because if you're not looking at that, you're not looking at the holism of a goal. And whether or not that goal in 5 years, 10 years can even happen. I'll finish on this example. I want you to consider what kind of garden a North Korean can grow. What kind of goals can they have? Pretty interesting question to ask. And now you can take from that and intuitively read out what won't be possible if we don't have a democracy for you. What won't be possible if you don't have rights of a certain kind for you. What won't be possible if there's a mass shooting every day. And the next thing you know, it's one of your kids. What won't be possible? Fill in the blanks and keep that in mind when you go vote. And you better damn well vote. Just saying. In the United States anyway, where we're voting. This is astrology. I can't say this enough. And it's a Jupiter, Uranus, and Taurus conjunction saying astrology is what you live. It is not a system in the sky. It is Gaia's energetics that were discerned by looking at the sky. That's what it is. And I think that's what this is going to come down to. You got to understand, none of us plants a garden if we don't have the environmental support for the seeds to grow. It's time we start co-creating through whatever we can, politics, voting, etc., protests, fill in your blank, your call. But it's time we started to create the actual environment for goals to continue to flourish for you, for me, for who's after us. It's time we actually took a minute and saw through William Shatner's eyes and let that be the compass of choice and what you do next. Now, connect it to the Mercury retrograde. What identities are zinging in you right now after I said all that? What identities don't let you see that? What identities, when you come around to your New Year's goals, don't even consider the greater matrix of karmic energy and co-creation that goal is going to enter into in the next year? Such that, well, guess what? That goal is not possible anymore because the karmic momentum shifted that possibility out of play. If you're someone who's marginalized, whether that's because of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, hello, patriarchy and women, you know what I'm talking about. Right now, if you're in multiple states in my country and you have a pregnancy that will kill you, you're fucked. And there's doctors, OBGYNs, fleeing these states and coming to states like mine. What are you going to do when you have a serious issue? You've got a garden where OBGYNs can't even practice because they'll go to prison. You want some Uranus, Taurus, Jupiter conjunct. This just happened, and here's the transit. That's the synchronicity. Is what I'm talking about. Birth itself and how we birth anything, archetypally birth anything, is in play here. How do we co-create, procreate? Here you are. All right, so moving on and then wrapping up here. Coming into, but let me show you the chart just so you can take a look. So this is the 20th. And folks, I mean, astrology is what we live. This is the time in the United States, at least, and most of the, I would say, Western Hemisphere, where the weather moves around. So you got two sky gods. Well, one's a sky god, one's a celestial, sort of sky god-ish, now in a earth sign. They're gonna whip around the air. This is what that chart looks like in terms of the conjunction. And I think it's quite powerful to consider. So can't say enough. Go read William Shatner's article if you really want to understand what this is about. That brought me to my knees and right to my soul. Now, coming into the conclusion here, how do you find this in your birth chart? Let's talk about that. I'm going to attempt, fingers crossed, to do this through my camera. I don't know if it will work, but this time we're going to look at Nancy Smith as our example as to how to find a lot of what I'm talking about in your birth chart. And then I'm explaining how to make connections to what I've said to your actual lived life and how that works with your birth chart. I'm old school. I can't really type yet. So, by the way, so I had a bike accident, and it happened on March 19th. Coming back to this, right on the day of, if not second day of the setup phase of the Mercury retrograde. Now, for me personally, this is a massive frickin' retrograde, and I've got massive activations going on all year and new triggering cycles coming into play. So I had a huge blindside. I'm not gonna, it's a little too personal to share publicly, but I will tell you because it involves other people, and I don't want to violate their privacy, even though there were violations involved, and certainly some painful endings of relationships. But I had a huge blindside with a few people in my life and my general sense of identity. And I had a pseudo-conscious pattern. I was aware of it, but I was not aware of the extent of the way this pattern had ran certain things in my life. And this without a doubt accident, what happened is I was on a mountain bike, but also not mountain biking, both and I had come off some gravel and gone up into this area where there was gravel, and that's why I had a mountain bike. But then I came back down, crossed a bridge, and was heading back to an actual paved trail. Just before I hit the paved trail, and I wasn't going that fast, my front wheel hit 2 inches of gravel. And you know how sometimes, and I've actually told another story about a bike accident I didn't have, in which I was saved by a divine intervention, actually. But this is interesting because this time I was not saved. And in fact, moreover, I was down. There was no slow-mo. There was 1 minute and then boom. I hit the ground so hard on my right side, and I'm going to just PSA this. You've got to wear helmets. I would be dead. I would have been killed instantly had I not had a helmet on. For God's sakes, you might think it's just a quick trip to the grocery store or riding your bike to work. This moment that happened to me could happen to anybody. And I was not being careless or going super fast. It was just, I didn't gauge the gravel and the sharpness of the turn, and my front wheel gave out, and I smacked down so hard that I broke in one of the most worst ways you can break your wrist. My left wrist, but it was my right side that actually hit the ground because the torque of the handlebars torqued so quick, it snapped my wrist. And I have now a plate with 9 screws. I was at risk of losing function of my left hand, and they had to cut into my carpal tunnel to release any kind of inflammation that might have caused nerve damage. This was one of the worst breaks. I found out post-op, by the way, that anyone could ever have. I mean, there's breaks where you get a cast because it's a minor. This was an obliteration of my wrist, which has a lot of symbolic meaning to me. And for me, it was an interruption of a certain pattern that was starting to come online again with some people in my life. And it also exposed that that role with those people had to absolutely end. And it's one of the most painful things. That is more painful than the wrist break, frankly, to be honest with you. So that's how this happened. And that brings me to a little bit of some post guidance or information around this eclipse and energies that are still active. Let's talk a little bit, and then I'm going to get into Nancy Smith's chart and show you a few things and then end this. But let's talk about this last eclipse, this new moon solar eclipse. Now, I'm trying to see if I have this actually on me here so that I can show you through the camera as well. But I'm operating more or less on one hand. So you're going to have to bear with me here. Anyway, yeah, this time, unfortunately, I don't have it. So what you see there is, once again, all of these things in Aries. You got the moon and the sun right on each other. So a new moon is when the sun and the moon come in alignment with the other, such that we do not, from Earth's perspective, see the moon. And when there's an eclipse, the moon, depending on where you are on the Earth, and this time it did occur in the United States, which it will not happen, for another 20 years again. And we had a partial one here in Colorado. But the moon gets in between the sun, and true to the word eclipse, eclipses the light. Now, I want you to think of this from a different point of view. I want you to think of the sun representing, in Aries, because this happened in Aries, an illumination of an activation of the Aries pattern within the world, within you, within me. This light's shining on it, right? And then this moon comes in and interrupts the usual way that we see Aries lit up in our lives. And that is to help us realize we're seeing in a way that's no longer useful. And there's a new beginning, new moon, that is trying to happen. But in an eclipse, there's such an emphasis on identities that are in the way from it happening that must be eclipsed for a minute for you to see, oh, whoa, I'm not in alignment with my own potential as it is expressed and developed through the Aries pattern. So it's an interruption, of the usual way I am the living embodiment of this. I'm telling you, I was out on a beautiful sunny day, spring sunny day here in Colorado, out for exercise, very Aries, and to go on a journey on my bike toward a mountain. All that's just classic Aries, set up here. And boom, I got interrupted. And boy, did I. So, and this just goes to show even the most intuitive amongst us has a blind side, especially when it comes to things that maybe are connected to childhood patterns and identities. Hell yeah. So I want you to think of the eclipse, and this is my point, and the energy is still here. That's why I'm saying, hey, we've got a few more days before Mercury in its retrograde kind of becomes messenger of the eclipse point, right, with Chiron still there. And it's going to bring back this question again. Hey, are you being wounded or healed by your identities? What are you doing? Where are you at with identity? And that's a deep discussion. And honestly, I'll tell you, what came out of this is not only hopefully this very useful social live, but I downloaded my next book and my next course this fall through all of this. I'm like, oh, I've got some material to teach through now. And I'm super excited about that, by the way. And of course, I'll let you know. If you want to know when I'm having social lives, et cetera, just go to ohado.com and get on my newsletter. But this is big. This is so freaking big. It's like going back to the very beginning, Aries, of all of our lives. And now from a very different co-creative and hopefully mystically mature standpoint, having to look at what we must now let go of when it comes to identities and how those identities are co-creating our lives, albeit perhaps unconsciously or maybe even pseudo-consciously or consciously. It is time to make a change. This is a crossroads of identity. And to make that change, you will need Aries energy. You're going to have to be willing to, quote unquote, and I have to qualify this, go it alone. I have to qualify it with saying you're not alone. Going it alone means I've got to leave this matrix of relationship dynamics and identity, and I've got to go out past into something new that you may not even yet fully sense what it is. And that's just fine. Go anyway. Does the pioneer know the next step? Hell no. Does the hero or heroine know the next step? No, not necessarily. You just need a good guide. Hello, I'm here. And not just me, other people in your life. Synchronicity will speak through connections. So this isn't about going alone and isolating per se. That might have some healing use for you, but it's more, I've got to go into a different crowd. I've got to find a new path forward from here. You've got to cut yourself a new path. And unfortunately, that often means some folks, and it's so fucking painful, do not come with us. I get it. I really do. So that's the nature of the power of this energy. It's an eclipse, an interruption of our usual reality and those in it and who we are in it and who they are to us. And it's time for something else. All right, now let's go into Nancy's chart. I'm going to see, is the camera is still working. So I might do some maneuvers here to adjust it just so you can see it better. Let's give it a try. She's a little blurry. I think that's because the battery's kind of sucky. Let me see here. All right. Well, we'll give it a go anyway. So if you're wondering, hey, Robert, how do I find all these things you're talking about? And, so I'm going to put this Post-it note here because this shows you the degrees of the Mercury retrograde. Oh, you can't see it anyway. This is, anyway, I've got this Post-it note that has the degrees of the Mercury retrograde, which are 16 degrees to 27 degrees. Now, if you do not have a copy of your birth chart, first of all, you're going to need to know, ideally, the exact time, the exact, obviously, place and date of your birth, and then cast it that way. Unfortunately, this is really looking bad. I apologize, everybody. I've been on one hand and just coming off pain meds and all sorts of other things, so I'm a little bit out of it to be totally set up for this, but hopefully you can see something. Now, this is Aries in Nancy's chart. That's the first house cusp of where you're going to see Aries. And for her, it's 11 degrees. And she's got Eris, coincidentally, which is considered conjunct this is the midheaven, which is called the medium coli. And MC for short. And so I could just say MH to make it easy. Midheaven. This is where you're going to express in your chart through your ego to the public through usually job. It's the 10th house as well, cusp, career, and calling, or all of the above. It's your ego's expression through identity to the public in the most public way, by the way. So now the Mercury retrograde for her is going to be happening between 16. So we got 16 degrees, Aries, 27 degrees, and that's the retrograde zone. Now that's going to slot right directly into this area here because this is 11 degrees. So 16 degrees is going to be after it. It'd be about right here. And this is how you would find it in your own chart. And then you're going to see, okay, she's having this whole thing in her 10th house. So for Nancy, this is going to have a lot to do with, because the axis is 10th all the way here to 4th, which is family and the public, and the identities that are found on that axis. And so one of the things to consider is that there was also, before this new moon, a full moon in March. Let's go to that real quick. That occurred in 5 degrees Libra. So up there, 10th house again, but now you see Libra on the top as the sort of scaly looking thing. And the moon was 5 degrees. So this whole entire eclipse zone deals with self and other. And then, of course, capping and sitting over all of it is identity. And it's the natural flow that our identities are what we relate to others through. What else are you going to relate through? So if you've got, your friends that are seekers, they study astrology, intuition, archetypes, metaphysics. Well, you relate through that part of you that's the seeker of truth and the laws of the universe and co-creation with those friends. Your identities come together and it's a party. So there's one example of just how we sort of match with people through identity when we look at the magnetics of like attracting like. Yet, we also have in magnetics, opposites attract. So this is where you're going to get someone who maybe is a blood donor attracting the vampire. They're actually opposites in a way, but opposites always have something at the base that's the same. Now, I can't get into all that. It's its own course. But then beyond that, you also have in magnetics repulsion, where let's say someone is a very loving, mystically mature adult that's really ready for a soul-based connection with somebody where there's reciprocity, there is ongoing inner work with oneself and each other, and there's a commitment to do that within the relationship, and there's a lot of awareness and loving space that's held at the, like, let's just say, most incredible level of light. All right, you got that person, but then you got the person who's codependent or a blood donor or an unrequited lover. Those magnetics will repel each other. The person that's loving and ready for the deep dive is going to likely sense in somebody who isn't that they're not, and will not be activated and attracted to that person. And sometimes you have opposites like that, or rather repulsions like that cross over for a minute, but it's a contract just to wake someone else up for a second to say, hey, you could be ready for someone like me down the line. So I'm just here to give you a synchronistic wake up sort of sign here, because what's next in your life is going to bring you to a dark night that will make you ready for someone like me. And you'll reference me. We're just going to have a brief encounter, but you'll reference me as a signpost of your potential, of what's the dawn on the other side of this dark night. Someone like me, not me maybe, or maybe me, will arrive. And then like will attract like, and here we go. But if you're not in a vibrational harmony, you'll repel, or you just won't want to engage. I have no desire to engage anyone who is wired up and jacked up in toxic political tribalism. No time for it. I have no interest. As soon as I see that coming, I deactivate and disconnect. I have no interest in that, because that's not my vibration. That's not my way of looking at things. Miss me with it. And people do miss you with it. So coming into this now, you want to consider, all right, what is activating in you? And the chart just zones that in through the house, the area of development that might be happening, or the arena of life where that might be happening. And it will recruit more than just that house, by the way. It'll recruit as polar opposite. So the fourth house is our family. How we arrive into the public is predicated absolutely by our family of origin garden, and how we were nurtured or not, and the seeds planted that grew, or were they weeds, were they roses, were they what? And so that's what grows up into the 10th house. And it predicates how well we adjust to being in the public, relating to the public through what? The identities. That the fourth house birthed in our development as children, or our family lines, by the way. So if you grow up in a poor family and then you meet the public, Well, there's a lot of patterns and identity that come with that could go all over the map, from feeling shame around everybody because you come from feeling like you were always less than because of money and resource scarcity, or it could go everywhere. The whole point is, this is about you understanding the eclipse zone deals with relationships and identity. They're connected. They're inextricably connected. Let's get back to Nancy to see how it works for her with my fuzzy ass camera. All right. So I do not understand why it's doing that. Mercury retrograde. So, you are your whole chart. So Nancy, by the way, her sun is in Scorpio here. She's got Moon in Pisces here, and Chiron in Gemini here. Rising sign over here is Cancer. She's got Saturn in Scorpio, Pluto Scorpio, Venus Libra, Mars Virgo, and a whole bunch of stuff in Sagittarius: Mercury, Uranus, Jupiter, South Node, and Neptune. And you are the whole entire chart. So if you have a house like she does, like the 8th house, she doesn't have any planets. That's not really true. All of us go through an 8th house developmental phase on our way to becoming an actualized, mystically mature adult, if that's in your contract to arrive at that level of awareness and empowerment. So, but everyone's going to go through an 8th house experience based on their contract and their level of capacity and readiness to, whatever that means for them. So this retrograde will bring up her sense of identities with the public. And I'm just going to riff around. Because this is not a real person, by the way. If anyone has this exact name, time, place, and birth, it is purely coincidental. Now, this would bring up all the identities that Nancy meets the public with. And for her, they're meant to be Aries-based. But let's say Nancy, being in a patriarchy, she meets actually the Aries identity in shadow form via tyrannical kings and queens that have been her bosses, because she hasn't stepped into her own sovereign yet. She hasn't owned her own healthy Aries energy. She can't assert for herself. She can't fight the good fight. She can't set boundaries down. She can't draw a sword. In fact, rather, because of the Moon in Pisces, which she has in the 9th house, she is predominantly a people pleaser, a victimized shadow empath. And so this retrograde is going to go, okay, you live your life through a victimized shadow empath, and it's time for a shift. It's time for you to become a love rebel. It's time for you to realize you can care for people and tell them to fuck off. And really mean that with all the love in your heart. And I'm not being facetious or making a joke. I really mean that. You can actually decide, you know what, I'll feel with you, but I'm no longer feeling for you, to all your friends and people in your life. And you know what, maybe I won't feel anything but my own vibe for a minute so I can find out my own baseline, and I'll get back to you later. Because I've got to take this new adventure of, and I'm riffing, of coming into my queen archetype and now establishing as an entrepreneur my own business. Oh, and by the way, oh, wow, look at this. I have Eris right there on the cusp of my 10th house. And I'm going to just need to, you know what, start my own business that's all about being a love rebel. And the way to actually get into the public through new identities is going to demand a conversation with Eris. And by the way, for all of you who may consider Eris to be a female goddess, I do not. If you want to find out why, that is in my series. But no. And I don't consider Eris to simply be discordia or disruption. Eris is a love rebel. Period. And not end of sentence, by the way. There's a lot more there. But our understanding of Eris has primarily been seen through our cultural bias. And if you don't get past cultural bias, you can't see this force for what it is. And just briefly, a love rebel is somebody who can both and life. It's a both and force. It is, I can both be loving and tell you, I'm going to draw a sword and take you out if you do not get out of my space. And there's nothing unloving about that. You violating me is violating you. You're taking my blood as a vampire doesn't serve your own holism. This is about holism and true mystical levels of loving and connection. And I'm a warrior to that for me and all of us. So Nancy will have some conversation, some synchronicities through the retrograde in her life that set up this exact kind of dilemma, dynamic awakening, perhaps 2x4 crash your bike experience. I don't know. But this is perhaps in this fictional read what we're going to look at with her. And when you're looking at yourself, you're going to go, okay, well, I'm going to have, and you could have similar archetypal themes just in a different area. So maybe for you, it's not the bigger public and your sense of calling and path of service to the public through an identity, which is what the 10th house is. It's something else. Okay, apply what I said to that. And all right, that said, guess what else is happening in her house? That's also the same place where the new moon solar eclipse just happened. It's also, interesting enough, somewhat connected to the last lunar full moon eclipse that happened, which would have actually been a 9th house, 3rd house axis activation. But that's how you find it in your own chart. I hope it's helpful. I'm so sorry for the blurred video. When I finally have 2 hands that are a little more functional, I'll be back with, I cleaned the lens of it too. I was doing this before I went live. I didn't have time to fix it. Okay. So I'm going to take a minute. That's kind of what I want you to focus on. It's probably quite a bit, obviously. And I want you to understand that this retrograde, though you may hear, hey, it's midpoint, it's not over. And by the way, it's really not over, because I'll tell you what happens in the integration phase. Let's come back to the dates. From April 25th, when the retrograde finishes, to the 6th at 16 degrees Aries, to May 13th at 27 degrees, that is when everything I just talked about, or everything that's come up for you in your life from April 25th to May 13th, we call it integration phase. Why? Because this is when you actually have to take all the awareness that these synchronicities have brought up, and now you got to change your life. These new truths that came through the retrograde, your journey to this Aries shadow territory and all that eclipse energy and Chiron activating here. All right, it's time for you to actually do something with what you know. Let me throw out a few questions that might help. Are you fighting a real rebellion or a false rebellion? This is a rebel archetype, Aries. So I'm going to riff around and do some triggering, because it's what I do. You know, are you out there now on social media calling every single person out because they aren't shouting around about Gaza and Palestine, which, by the way, I personally find to be an absolute atrocity? But are you doing that? Or are you actually focusing on, I don't know, raising money for the people that need it there, doing something, going there, doing something else besides noise online? Is that a real rebellion? I don't really feel it is. And in fact, I think you going after other people when you have no idea why they say or don't say what they do is a waste of your time. I had some people come for me. What? I have had family emergency after family emergency and my own personal crisis. What are you doing? And by the way, I did talk about it. And I'm talking about it now. So I'm love rebelling for you. With all the love in my heart, what the fuck do you know about my life? Stop shaming me for what you perceive to be what? Not calling out what? What do you know? You know nothing. Go raise money. You want to take your Aries energy somewhere to be productive? There you go. Miss me with it otherwise. I'm the kind of person, as a gay man, I don't have time for that stuff. I know what it's like to actually fight the good fight and fight for a cause. And I care about everybody. And I always teach that. So, you know, this just giving you examples where's the false rebellion? You know, we fight about this and that because political tribalism triggers it in us and keeps us too busy with false rebellions to actually realize the real rebellion would be gutting out everyone in Congress, reelecting everybody under new standards to even run for Congress, and having actual, I don't know, criteria to even run for presidency. Just saying. And this is Aries energy. It's direct. It's I don't have time for bullshit. And it's also loving. It can be very loving. It can be the most loving thing to say, listen, this is my boundary, just so you're aware. I really want to connect with you and relate to you, but we can't do that without healthy understanding of these are my boundaries. And they're there for my holism. and I'll honor yours for yours as well. So you may have a lot of these dynamics going on where you're having to ask these questions. And then when the integration comes, that phase, you got to actually do something about where you know you're being called to have more courage, be more assertive, go it alone, quote unquote, leave a relationship, say a truth in a relationship that needs to be said, set a boundary, whether it's cut down on your own path and move forward, and wherever you're called, wherever you're hearing the heroic call, all right, answer the phone. And most notably, love all of you no matter what, even your shadow ass sabotaging identities. You know, all of you gets to be here. All of us gets to be here. If we can allow that, I think we have a chance of real connection and real love for each other and real appreciation and compassion for each other. The more we can include about each other, that's what compassion is about, in part, encompassing, the more that we can actually have the real love rebellions that we really most need. So anyone got any questions real quick? Oh my gosh, I'm at 2 hours. I probably should just go. I really hope this was helpful. And if it was, please smash that like button, share this around with whomever you think it'll help. I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I'm half, working here. So I really appreciate that. And really, truly check this out, y'all. This is, really a powerful guide. And it goes into a lot of depth around some of the stuff I've just touched the surface on in this. It's 50% off just for a few more days. And I think you're going to really find it pretty amazing, guiding, and truly valuable for this year. This year is something else. Just wait till we get to the fall, my Lord. And, I offer predictions in it. I give guidance on so much stuff. It's so in depth. The depth got away from me, to be honest with you. And I think you could really benefit from that. All right. Well, listen, everyone, I'm going to close it down. I was going to do just 90 minutes, and it's been a while. So here you go. But so much love to you, truly. And from one love rebel to another, love yourself no matter what. All of you gets to be here. All of everyone else gets to be here as well. But that doesn't mean that we can't fight the good fight, have boundaries, go it alone, get out of toxic dynamics, go into the unknown, and leave old toxic sabotaging identities behind. That's also true. That's also true. But we can always bring love and connection to self, no matter what's happening. And that's my just most heartfelt wish for you as you go through the rest of this retrograde energy, and also as you go into the integration phase from here. So I am back, and I'll be back with more information at some point here. I have felt such an urgency and call to get this out to help as many of you as possible, and I hope it did. I'll see you again in the next video. All right, namaste.